conflicts. They've never had to share with someone, let me learn how to navigate these conflicts. They'll adjust through that culture shock moment into their initial adjustment. That typically is when they start to see they're starting to make friends outside of the initial connections that they made. So they might have had some connections through Jumpstart or on their floor, but now they're making more friends across campus. They're able to navigate some of those difficult conversations or difficult challenges in a more meaningful way. And they're overall probably seeing some better routines. And you're probably hearing them talk about loving college again. Like week 3 and 4, I'd be like, man, I don't know if this is for me. I don't know what's going to happen. In that culture shock moment, you as parents might be tempted to say, hey, come home, let's take a break. Come home and be home for a little bit. Let me encourage you, keep them here for 6 weeks. Encourage them to stay on campus for 6 weeks. You might be tempted to say, all right, it's been a lot, you've been here for a few weeks, come home when they're hitting that low point. I would encourage you to say, stay there for 6 weeks. Get through fall break, and then come home at fall break, and that be your first time home. Once they get through that initial adjustment, typically when they go home for the first time, and they're home for an extended period, not just an overnight, but they're home for an extended period, they will come back and have another recoil and another low point. That's called our mental isolation. Typically at that point, they are feeling pulled between the home life that they have and the college life that they're developing. They're feeling pulled between what they know, like their routines and friends at home that they've now engaged with, and it's different, and they're making routines and friends here, and they're feeling pulled between both of them. Typically, we see it after fall break or Thanksgiving, and there'll be another low point in the semester for our students. But then after that, you'll start to see that they will be in a stage of acceptance and integration, where they're fully feeling like this is where they're supposed to be. They're fully finding their friendships. Parents, this might be a time where you hear them say, like when they're home visiting you, all right, I'm ready to go home again. And they're not meaning home where they lived for the last 18 years. They're meaning college. They might say something like that. That would be heartbreaking, I'm sure, as you hear them say, I'm ready to go home, and it's not with you. But that should be a moment of celebration because they're feeling like this is where they're supposed to be. They've developed their friendships, they've developed their communities, they've developed that sense of belonging, they feel like they're successful. That's what college is about. So there's this W, highs and lows, that they'll experience throughout the semester. This is actually based on some research from a couple psychologists that study how people experience culture shock. Gallahorn and Gallahorn studied initially people who were like missionaries and going overseas. And this is some of the characteristics that they saw as people went from one stage to the next. And people then took this and said, okay, maybe this culture shock that people experience when they go overseas actually happens when they start new jobs, when they move to new neighborhoods. And some started to say, well, maybe this happens at college. And that's how we developed this for the college setting as well. You can kind of see what some people talk about. Like in the honeymoon stage, they have hope. They are anticipating. They have this hope of what could be here in college. They're doing okay, but those first few weeks they're doing okay, but they're starting to get a little dissatisfied. They recoil. They have some doubt about themselves, and then they hit that culture shock. They go through some hard times. They bounce back up, and they start getting adjusted, and then they go home again. And now they're feeling torn between these two spaces. And then they get fully integrated. Let me ask you this. I'm looking for some feedback, so this is participation time. If we anticipate students hitting a low point, a couple weeks into the semester, and then have a little bit of an adjustment back up, and then another low point, what might we see on a college campus? What might students be doing when they hit a low point? Staying in rooms with door closed, yep. Some of that social isolation pieces. Low participation in class. Late to class, attendance issues. One of the things.
Bad social skills at that point, just kind of acting out.
Bad social social skills, yep. One of the things that I use to kind of evaluate where our students are at is when do they access some of our support services. This is a graph of when first year students reached out to the counseling center last year. So you can see that week 2 and week 3, we hit a spike. Students are starting to hit a low point, and they're hitting a spike and reaching out for resources, trying to figure out how do I manage this. And you can see that it's still elevated, but kind of tapers off, and then there's a low point here. That means students are having it in that initial adjustment phase, right? They're feeling like they're getting back into the routine. They feel like they're making sense of what college is about. They're not feeling like they need support anymore. So they've stopped reaching out for counseling and signing up for counseling. But this is fall break time. And then they come back and they start saying, oh man, I'm in another moment where I need some help. And so we see another spike and tapered off. And then I don't know what to make sense of this. I think y'all just stress your students out. I mean, you're going home like, I don't want to go home. No. But you kind of see that if we expect a W curve out of students, that we would expect kind of like an M curve for reaching out to supports. And like this kind of shows a little bit of that M curve. Does that make sense? So here's what it means for you as parents. You will likely hear a lot of joy and excitement and enthusiasm the first couple weeks. You will then begin to hear, I don't know what this is about. I don't know if I'm equipped for this. I don't know if I'm ready for this. Depending on your relationship, they might stop calling because they're super stressed, or they might call even more because they're super stressed. I don't know what your relationship like is with your child, but you kind of anticipate what your needs are. Here's a second tip for you. So kind of you can kind of know where they're at. Second tip is take note of this and figure out what your student needs. Do they need a care package from mom and dad that just says, hey, we believe in you. You can do this. Do they need $20 Venmo to them so they can go out to dinner and a movie with friends? Do they just need some time with friends? Like, you know your child, you know what they need. You can kind of anticipate that. But I also want you to know when they hit week 9, week 10, and they start saying, I don't know if this is for me again, you might say, man, they should have had this figured out. They're 2/3 of the way through the semester. They should have this figured out. It's normal for them to start questioning everything again. This might be a time when they start saying, I don't know if this major is for me. Get them connected with some of our career services or persistence coaches that can kind of talk through those options for them. But it's normal for them to start having a second round of questioning about 2/3 of the way through the semester. And that's normal. That's not something to be concerned about with your student. Does that make sense? So you might ask, well, what causes these spikes of culture shock? Well, the big thing is stress. So many people want to talk about having a stress-free life. And that is not the goal. The goal is not to have a stress-free life. The goal is to know the difference between good stress and bad stress, and know how to cope and manage with distress, which is the bad stress. Eustress is good stress. Some of this might be things that you're going through right now. You're sending your child off to college. That can be a stressful moment, but it's tied to a specific event. It's tied to a specific time frame that you can often say, okay, here's the way out of it. Things that are chronic, things that are ongoing, things that don't have a specific way out, often can lead to distress, which is what causes anxiety and depression. It's not the only cause, but that leads to some more serious issues. So these are some characteristics of eustress and distress. Eustress is starting something new, like college. It's learning a new skill, making new friends, starting a new job. All these things typically happen for students. They are coming back, starting a new group like band or an athletic team. They're starting college and understanding what it means to have a syllabus and not a teacher that tells you every week what's due, but you have to manage a syllabus and know what's due each week. They're making new friends. Maybe I went to college saw nobody from my church went, nobody from my family had gone. I knew nobody when I went to college. I was going to get all new friends. Your student might be in a similar spot where they're coming somewhat by themselves, but they've got a great support here, but they're making those new friends. Distress, which is the harmful stress, is often high pressure, chaotic environment, things that they can't manage, a chronically heavy workload, media overload. Have any of you heard of Anxious Generation? A book called Anxious Generation by a guy named Jonathan Haidt. He talks about the connection between increased smartphone usage and social media and anxiety and depression among today's youth. It's kind of a follow-up work to iGen by Jean Twenge a few years ago. Jonathan Haidt was one of her researchers. A few years ago, Jean Twenge wrote a book on called iGen that made a correlation between the increased use of smartphones and anxiety among today's youth. But at that time, they only had correlation. Jonathan Haidt, who's a professor at NYU in New York City, continued the research and wrote a follow-up called Anxious Generation, where he now has causation. So before it was just there's a connection here. Now it is the increased smartphone has caused some of the anxiety that we're seeing in today's youth. And he talks about how we moved from a childhood of play to a phone childhood and what's caused some of these things. If you don't have that book, I would strongly encourage you to go out and buy it, buy an audiobook, listen to it on your way home today. But it's a great resource to kind of talk about what's happening in today's society. And these students, smartphones came out in 2007, they're in high school now. And we're starting to get them here on our campus where smartphones have inundated society and the constant connection to social media. I'd encourage you to look up that book, Anxious Generation. But that can cause distress, a lack of support from home. Let me tell you, because you're here today, I know that none of your students are feeling this. You're here, you're helping them move into college, you're taking out some time of your Sunday morning to be here and learn about this. So I'm sure none of your students feel this way, but a lack of support from home can cause distress. Here's a couple other characteristics. Eustress is typically short-term, while distress is long-term and chronic. Eustress is typically a situation the student is confident that they can overcome. Distress typically has too much challenge and not enough support. They're feeling too challenged of what they're trying to accomplish. Too many unknowns for distress. Eustress typically has that right balance of challenge and support. With eustress, there's typically a reward at the end. Okay, I know I'm in a stressful moment, but if I study hard, if I study right, I'll get a good grade on this test. So there's a reward at it. Distress can often mean like, there's so much hitting me right now, I don't know my way out, and I don't know what the end is. I don't know what the end goal is. So these are just some differences between eustress and distress. We want students to have eustress in college. Eustress is when people move outside of their comfort zone, and when you move outside of your comfort zone, you get into areas where you learn and you grow. You're faced with challenges that you're able to overcome and reflect back on it and say, okay, now I know that I can overcome this. When the next challenge comes, I know some techniques and some strategies to overcome this next challenge. Eustress is good, and quite frankly, we try to create opportunities for students to be in a level of eustress. Like when we have student leader roles and other things, we try to create this because we know we can balance that support. We're going to give you a challenge. We want you to plan this program by yourself, but if you hit a hard bump, come and we'll help you overcome that bump. We try to create spaces for eustress. We try to help them cope with distress. Does that make sense? So typically, when students hit moments of distress, that's where you see some of the bumps throughout the semester. One of the best techniques to help people manage with some of the stress is a growth mindset. That's my son. Isn't he a handsome guy? I think he kicks after his dad a little bit. So this picture was 2 years ago. His first day of first grade. We had just moved here from Indiana. I grew up and lived in Indiana, and I worked at a school in Indiana before coming here. And we moved the end of July, and about 2 or 3 weeks later, school started for him. Brand new school, didn't know anybody, didn't know the teachers. And these are true stories. About a week before school started, I said, hey bud, like, how are you feeling about starting a new school? This is truly what he said. He said, well, Dad, I'm a little nervous, but it's a good nervous. I said, a good nervous? Well, what do you mean by that? I said, well, I liked kindergarten, so I'm sure I'll like first grade. I just don't know who my teacher is. I don't know what to expect. He said, I know I'll make friends. I just don't know who my friends are yet. So he was kind of articulating that growth mindset of saying, I know something is coming, I just don't know what it is yet. Right? Again, another true story. About a week after school started, I said, hey, how's it going? I said, well, are you making friends? I said, no, not yet. He had a really good friend in kindergarten named Baby Shepherd. And so that was his best friend. He's like, well, I'm making friends, but none of them are as good as Davey. He said, but it's okay, Dad. They just don't know how cool I am yet. All right, kid. A little self-confident there, but all right. So he's demonstrating that he understands that there's going to be tough times, but he can overcome them. He just hasn't overcome them yet. A growth mindset is different than a fixed mindset. Carol Dweck, in her book, I think it came out probably 10 or 12 years ago, called Mindsets, talks about the difference between a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. A fixed mindset typically says, I have an ability or I don't have an ability. I'm smart or I'm not smart. I'm good at sports or I'm not good at sports. It's either or. And she said when you're in a fixed mindset, opportunities for learning and growth don't happen. Opportunities to learn how to manage stress don't happen. Opportunities to manage your emotions don't happen because you get into the mindset that you either are this or you are not this. Rather than having a fixed mindset, we need to focus on having a growth mindset. A growth mindset tries to tell us we know that things are going to come, and we might not have the skills to accomplish that thing yet, but we'll get there. Those kinds of mindsets allow students to approach difficulties and challenges in college in a more meaningful way because they know that they will overcome it. It might be a moment of stress, but they know that they will overcome it. So here's the differences between a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. A fixed mindset, typically people avoid challenges. They see a challenge and say, this is too much for me, I'm not going to do it, I don't have the skills to do that. So I'm not even going to try. Things are just too hard. They ignore feedback because they either feel like they've got it down or they don't need the feedback because it won't help them. They're often threatened by the success of others. Typically they want to look smart and they give up easily. Growth mindset, on the other hand, embraces challenges. They'll say, okay, I know this is going to be hard, but I'll overcome it. I'll be able to accomplish this. They see effort as a path to mastery. They know that effort and perseverance will allow me to get this done. They learn from feedback. They take it and say, okay, how can I do this differently or better? They're inspired by others. They like to try new things. They persevere in difficult situations. So there's 3 things that I think can help people develop a growth mindset. One I've kind of talked about already with my son, but the power of the word yet. You might not have a skill or ability yet, but it doesn't mean you can't get there at one point. Practice and perseverance, you can develop that skill or ability. Identify your own growth. Sometimes if you're able, especially when they're not feeling distress or some of that culture shock moment, if you're able to now start talking to them about, okay, can you identify a time that you faced a difficult challenge and you overcame it, and that difficult thing is now easy for you. What did you do to make it easier for you? Help them start thinking about that now when things aren't tough, so that when you get into the tough moments, you can say, hey, remember a few weeks ago when we talked about this, and you said, hey, when I just put a little bit more time into it, I was able to figure it out. Or when I went and got help, I was able to figure it out. Or when I talked to someone, I was able to figure it out. Help them now think about what kind of attitudes, what kind of skills they need to help to overcome those challenges. Does that make sense? So if you start doing it now when you're in that honeymoon period and things are going well, they can think about it and have honest responses. You do it when they're in a moment of crisis. They're like, oh, I just don't know. You do it when they're in a moment now where they're happy and things are going well. They're able to process it meaningfully, and then you can reference it later. But identify their own growth. And then focus on abilities. Don't focus on the achievement. Focus on the ability. I love how you stuck to learning. Like for my daughter this summer, she fell off her bike. She cried, had to put a Band-Aid on her knee. But I love how you stuck to learning how to ride your bike. I know that was hard. If I would have focused on, I love how you learned to ride your bike, that feels different than the characteristics of the perseverance and stick-to-itiveness of sticking to something when it was hard. So here's a couple of examples of things that might impact students here while they're in college. So let's say a student was hired as a student leader for next year. Instead of saying you're a natural leader, which focuses on the achievement, say, I love how you were brave enough to go for a job like this. That kind of shows the characteristics. You see the difference there? Because if we focus on the achievement of getting that job, and then next year they apply for another student leader position and they didn't get it, now they're questioning, am I not a natural leader? Am I not as good as mom and dad thought because I didn't get this other student leader position? But if you focus on the characteristics of bravery, then that's easier to manage when they don't get that next position. Or how about someone who gets an A on the test? Instead of saying, hey, you are so smart, try saying, I'm so proud of how you persevered with this course. I know it was a hard topic to learn. What happens if someone thinks that they're naturally smart and then the next test they fail, or the next paper they don't get a good grade on? Instead of focusing on the achievement of getting a good grade, focus on the characteristic of sticking to something that was a difficult topic to understand. Does that make sense? When we're able to start developing a growth mindset in students, they move from the fixed mindset to a growth mindset. So when they're focused on growth mindset, they're able to move from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset and be able to, when they hit those difficult low points in the W curve, they're able to say, okay, this is just a moment in time. This is just something that I might not have the skills yet to cope with, but I'll get there. I might need the stick-to-itiveness. I might need the perseverance. I might need the to know how to reach out and get that help, get that support, but I'll get there. If they have a fixed mindset, when they hit that low point, they'll just begin to say, this is just who I am now. I'm just a stressed out person. This stressful situation will never leave because it's been a week and I don't know what to do and I'll never overcome this. They get stuck in that fixed mindset, this is just who they are. And rather, we'd like to develop a growth mindset that you're in a hard spot now, but you'll overcome. Make sense? So, we covered 3 topics today. Are there any questions before we move on to our next exercise? Any questions about the W curve? Any questions about stress? Any questions about the growth and fixed mindset? Or questions about what we do in Olivet? Yeah? A link for the slide. We're actually taping the presentation today. I think it'll be on YouTube, and I think Susan Wolf. If you haven't met Susan yet, Susan is our Associate Vice President for Advancement that helps oversee a lot of the parent connection pieces. I think she will send out a link to the YouTube presentation for you to see this. Yeah. So we have Jumpstart the next 2 days, and we cover this in a slightly different way, but we cover this during Jumpstart. primarily focused on, you'll hit some hard times, here's some resources for you, let's talk about it. Yeah? Second semester. A lot of these things will carry over to second semester. Like if you have other students in college, you will likely see this W curve happen each semester of college. But instead of such drastic highs and lows, they begin to level out. Students begin to develop those coping mechanisms or begin to develop that growth mindset that the waves become less choppy and more smooth, but they still feel it. Does that make sense? So like if you have a sophomore, a lot of times sophomores come into college and they begin to question their major because they're in more major classes. And so you'll see some highs and lows as sophomores because they're not just in the intro to business or intro to nursing, they're now taking business or nursing classes and they're questioning, is this really what I want to do? I'm an accounting major, I didn't know what debits and credits were, and this is way too much for me. You know? So they'll see that a little bit. So this is something I'm extremely proud of. When I first got here 2 years ago, our wait list to get into counseling services was over 100 people long. We have invested in hiring new counselors. We've invested in some online platforms. Last year, our wait list never exceeded 8. And those 8 were primarily students coming in saying, hey, I'd like to meet with a male counselor. We have one male counselor, and so they had to wait a little bit. Or I'd like to have the counselor that focuses on eating disorders, whatever that might be. We have some counselors that have some specialties. And so the wait list really was waiting for those. Our goal is that students would be able to see a counselor within 2 weeks. But we made a lot of strides. Students that are on the wait list, we have online platforms, particularly helpful for like anxiety and depression, some cognitive behavior therapy platforms that students can begin engaging during that 2-week time period before they see a counselor. Yeah?
Regarding counseling, are your counselors, are they trained to follow a specific set of Olivet principles, or when you're bringing in a counselor, is counselor A very different than counselor B? You have a very different experience depending on who it is that you're seeing.
Yeah, so we have principles that in our hiring. Every counselor that works here is a Christian. Every counselor professes Jesus as their Lord and Savior. Every counselor is also a trained mental health therapist through the state of Illinois. So they all have some of those elements. Now they all approach counseling in a slightly different way. So to say that every experience, no matter who you meet with, is the same would not be true. But what is true is that we hire very specific people that align theologically with the Church of the Nazarene, that are professing Christians, that have the training to be counselors.
Is that statement or requirement, is that all positions? Is it in faculty only? Is it faculty and staff?
Every employee at the university gets asked some very specific questions about their faith, so every employee at the university is a professing Christian. I don't want to say every employee is a member of the Church of the Nazarene, but every person is a professing Christian that Jesus is their Lord and Savior. We ask very specific questions about sexuality and their beliefs around sexuality to make sure they align with who we are. Very specific questions about women in ministry, making sure that we can support women who want to be pastors, because that's part of our identity as Church of the Nazarene. So there's some very specific pieces in there that we ask our employees. Yeah.
In line with what he was just saying, I am curious about the best example that you can state that all of that will not support my student if they choose to reject Christ's substitutionary atonement for them. How do you guys play that out when you have people that question their faith, question the doctrines of the biblical Savior?
Yeah, good question. So, you know where we're going here today. We are unapologetically Christian in so much of what we do. We have required chapel twice a week. We allow students to have 3 skips. So they have chapel 2 days a week, 3 skips. Our student code of conduct says things like, you're not going to have not going to drink. Even though Illinois allows marijuana use, we don't allow it on our campus. We don't allow drugs on our campus. We don't allow vaping on our campus. We require students to take theology classes and Christian ministry classes to talk about how do we live life as Christians. Is it fair to say that every student here is a Christian? No. We have students here that are not Christians. Being a Christian is not a requirement to be here at Olivet. We believe that students can come here, be transformed because of the educational experience that they have, and learn to know Christ. It would be fair to say that a majority of our students are Christians. It would not be fair to say that all of our students are Christians. And if a student comes and says, you know what, I came here as a Christian, but now I'm doubting, now I'm questioning, honestly, doubt and questioning is part of the Christian journey. And so we're willing to journey with them, be able to ask some of those life questions, be able to help them navigate those difficult situations, and come out on the other side a stronger Christian because they're doubting and questioning in an environment that is rooted in Christ. You know, people can leave high school. People can leave high school and they can go into the workforce, they can go into the military, they can go into college, and within each of those, there's so many different variables. Really, what students are choosing is who is going to have an impact on my life during those transformative years. And students at Olivet are choosing a place that believes that Jesus is Lord and Savior, believes that we have all been saved by God, believes that we can live a holiness life, and that's what we're inviting them into. And so we journey with them during these 4 critical years of their life. I don't know if that answers your question.
Well, I apologize, it's good, but what's the best example that you can say? The reason why I ask is because if you have an example, you have people that are in an environment that challenges their faith, and yet where does all of that, how does it plant itself and say, no, Christ died for you, here's the examples, here's how we make that statement, here's how we encourage you to follow his path for you, as opposed to, well, I hope you figure it out.
Yeah. I think one of the greatest examples is a guy named Tony Marshall. Tony is our university chaplain now. When he came to Olivet, he was not a believer, but he came on a basketball scholarship. He wanted to play basketball and knew that was the only way he was going to be able to afford to go to college. When he came here, he was mentored by a guy named Ralph Hodge, who was our longtime basketball coach, a guy named Nick Berkey, who's now our basketball coach. And because of those relationships, he began to understand that, well, when he first got here, he was feeling, and he talks about this, so I don't think I'm saying something that he wouldn't share himself, but he was filling that void with sex and drugs and alcohol. And because of the relationship that he had with Ralph Hodge and with Nick Berkey and with other coaches, he began to experience Christ in a unique and dynamic way. And he graduated as a Christian ministry major, went and worked in youth ministry, and is now our campus pastor here, working with students in those situations where they're doubting and questioning because he himself doubted and questioned. And now he's a university chaplain. He was our chaplain for NYC last summer down in Tampa. He travels the country speaking over the summer for youth ministry camps. And so he would be an example of someone who came in questioned, but because of the mentorship and because of the life-on-life relationship that the coach had, he gave his life over to Christ. So I want to be mindful of time. It's 9:45. I'll be up here for more questions. So if you have other questions or want to explore anything more, feel free to come up here and ask questions. But as you came in, you probably received a postcard. If not, we have a couple postcards here at the front. I want you to think about what we talked about today. Think about the W curve. Think about stress. Think about growth mindset. And you have a chance to kind of put this into practice. So we are going to send these postcards to your student on the 3rd week of the semester, which, think about the W curve, that's kind of a low point for them. Here's a chance for you to kind of write a message for them that they might need to hear during that 3rd week of the semester. All you need to do is put your student's name at the top. I'll make sure it gets to them through our postal service. If you want to write your name underneath it. And then if you want to either drop them off up here at the front or on the white, there should be a couple probably on the white counters in the back. Feel free to just put them sure your senior gets it in the third week. But here's a chance just for you to write a note to them to encourage them during a difficult time in the semester. I'll be up here at the front. If you have any questions, feel free to come up and ask. And then join me at the beginning of worship service at 10:30. Thank you. There's a few pins floating around, so if you need one, we might be able to